Well, we've made it to the last lecture in Module 3 and the last lecture in the first week of class, so good job. Just as a reminder, these are the learning objectives for Module 3. So we spent the last couple of lectures talking about how we can use C# data types to represent integers and real numbers. Today, we'll finish off with the value types in C#, talking about how we can use bits to represent a couple of other things. One of the things that we'd like to be able to represent in the computer is characters. So for example, if we were running a game where the player uses the keyboard to enter menu choices, say it's a text-based game if you must, we will we'll read in from the keyboard a player's character input and then store it. And so characters are one thing that we like to store. And in C#, characters are stored in the data type called char. Some people will call it char, but I'll always call it char. So a char is comprised of 16 bits, and it stores the Unicode representation of a particular character. If you've been around for a while, you've heard of ASCII. ASCII was an 8-bit representation of characters, but we have moved on from ASCII, except in very tightly constrained environments, to using Unicode instead. And so we use the char data type to store characters in our programs. Given that, you have an in-lecture quiz that you need to complete now. The other value type that C# provides to us is Boolean. And in fact, the data type itself is called bool. And bools only have one of two possible values. They're true or false. Some of my students try to make me angry by saying the two values are 1 and 0, or 0 and not 0, or some other thing. But in fact, bools in C# store true or false. And we're going to find that this is really, really useful to us when we need to make decisions in our program. If we need to decide between two or more courses of action, or if we are iterating or looping for a while. For example, while a user enters invalid data, we keep looping until they've entered valid data. We'll find that the bool data type is very helpful for us to accomplish those programming actions. So far, the operations that we've talked about for data types have been fairly intuitive in what you're used to. It may not be the case that you're used to the Boolean operators. So let's talk about the three that we're going to use in a little more detail. The first is AND. So the way AND works is we have two Boolean operands. So each of the operands can be true or false. And the way AND works is AND evaluates to true if both of those operands are true. If either one of them is false, including both of them being false, AND will evaluate to false. So AND is all about they both have to be true. The second Boolean operation is OR. And OR works differently. OR is basically checking to see if one or both of them are true. So the only way that OR evaluates to false is if both of the operands are false. And finally, NOT. And NOT is kind of a fun one. It is a unary operator, and so it only is applied to a single operand. But this is one of those great times where you actually just can use logic, right? Not true is false. Not false is true. And so we can use this to do what's called negating a Boolean operand, to flip it, to change it to the opposite value. And that works, of course, because there are only two values that a Boolean variable can have. Okay, given that discussion, you have another in-lecture quiz to accomplish. This is an incredibly short lecture. So to recap, sort of over the last few lectures, we've talked about value types, and value types can be used to represent integers, real numbers, characters, and booleans. And that's really what you should take out of Module 3, of course with some practice, doing the labs hopefully, and definitely doing the programming assignment. Next week and next time, we'll start on Module 4, where we start talking about classes and objects, which are really the foundations of object-oriented programming.